I am fascinated by old games that don't work on modern systems. They offer an interesting puzzle that's often more fun than the original game, so let's see what we've got to play with today. As I was mulling over ideas for a new project, a suggestion on Discord caught my eye, an obscure RPG called Venetica from 2009 that I'd never heard of, which has a slew of problems, including a crash when you talk to a certain character at a specific point in the game. Colour me intrigued. Of course, I had no idea how far into the game this crash happens, so I bought it on GOG and started playing. It starts off like all good stories do, at a party. Then some twat with a nipple on his hat shows up to ruin everyone's fun. My boyfriend dies, wherever this is shows up, exposition, 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 and to the shock of no one, I'm the chosen one and now must solve all the world's ills. I'll spare you all the gameplay, but I played for a few hours and it's not bad. It's like a slightly worse Fable that looks like a slightly worse Oblivion. It even has that severe overuse of Bloom that was popular at the time. Anyway, I finally made it to the main city, farted around a bit, and then Oliver Twist tells me that the character we need to talk to is finally waiting for us. So I scoot on over to the guild building, find Leon, my brother, and the game does indeed crash.
That looks good. What are you doing here, Leon?
What do you say?
I then did this several times to confirm that it was consistent. Time to crack this open. Looking at the game files, there's a launcher, and if we right click we can see that this is just a shortcut for an exe in the release folder. Now looking in this folder, there's the main game exe and a bunch of DLLs it needs. Now one immediately caught my eye, ogre main.dll. Ogre is an open source rendering engine, and many years ago, when I had hair, I used Ogre for a university project, so I have fond memories of it. Anyway, let's run this under a debugger so we can see the state of the program when it crashes. So the first thing that immediately jumps out to me is that the game has symbols. If we look a bit deeper, then you can see the game is structured as a library, pina3core.dll, and an executable, venetica.exe. As a lot of the functionality is in the library, this means it also exports the function names, so this will make reverse engineering a lot easier. So we crash in a member function for the Ogre Radian class. Now here's the interesting thing, or at least the thing that is interesting to me. We can see from the debugger that this function has the done.thiscall API. Now this call is a Microsoft-specific API optimized slightly for C++ code. Basically, all arguments are passed on the stack, but the implicit this pointer, the secret first argument to all C++ class member functions, is passed in via the ECX register. And lo and behold, ECX is null, so we're calling a function on a null object. A classic bug. I was curious if this was some bug triggered by a Windows update, which has certainly happened before, so I set up a Windows Vista VM, a fine vintage, and copied the saves across.
What do you say?
It still crashed, so maybe this bug has just always been there. I also watched through not one, but 2 full playthroughs on YouTube, and neither one even bothered to talk to Leon, so that was a waste of my time. There's been a few reports of this bug, and the Steam posts suggest there's some log files. Nothing jumps out to me about log files, but just digging through the game files, we can find a settings.ini file. This has a bunch of options not exposed by the in-game menu, including the option to run in windowed mode, which makes debugging a lot easier. There's also options for setting log levels, as well as enabling the Ogre logs. However, these don't seem to have any effect, which is frustrating. I've run the game under API Monitor, and I can see it's getting an error trying to open the log files, but the parent directory for this log file doesn't exist. If we create that and rerun the game, we get the logs. We get 2 log files, and if we monitor both at the point of the crash, we get speaker mismatch. However, this doesn't really help us, as talking to this chap in the hallway also yields the same message. Unfortunately, the logs are a bit of a dead end. Okay, back to the crash. Walking up the call stack, we can see that the debugger thinks at this point EAX holds a vtable for a level object. Eventually we end up at the function onObjectCreated, which calls setActiveCamera, so maybe the crash is something to do with camera transitions. This getYour function gets called a lot during the talking scene. Looking at the assembly, we can see it's loading ECX, i.e. the this pointer, from a member variable offset oxa44 relative to EAX. If we just observe these, then eventually the loaded ECX is null, which leads to the crash. It seems to be loading ECX from the same object each time, so if we set a hardware breakpoint on that offset, we can see it gets written to by these three functions, and these just seem to get called every time the camera angle changes. This function called popCamera seems to set that value to 0, however it's called lots of times during the cutscene. For some reason the last set to 0 seems to persist, so it's not being reset anywhere else. If we just use the debugger to skip over setting the value to 0, we get this weird camera angle, but also the dialogue options. However, choosing any of these raises an exception about having no cameras left to pop. This is starting to feel like this particular dialogue scene isn't configured correctly, i.e. there's not enough camera transitions or something. We can use quite a powerful technique in x64 debug to trace and log the higher level logic. If we set a conditional breakpoint but with a condition of 0 or false, then it will never be hit. However, we can still get it to trigger a log, so we can use this to log whatever we want at any point in the program without ever having to actually pause it. So let's log the popCamera function and its counterpart, pushCamera. We can see that during the Leon conversation there's a double pop, but if we take a short walk to someone else who also has a dialogue-based conversation, we can see the pushes and pops match up. If we use the debugger to coerce the program and skip the second pop, we still crash, but all is not lost as there's another double pop, and if we also skip over that, then the dialogue continues as normal and we don't crash.
Maybe later, Leon.
You know where to find me, sister, for the moment at least.
If we work off the assumption this was always broken, then we may be the first people, apart from the development team, to ever see this part of the dialogue. Looking back at the code, the nefarious second pop comes from this if statement, and it's the only logic that's guarded by these checks. Now we could just knock out this pop and assume it's a bug. This works, but it doesn't sit right with me. We need to figure out why this if statement is triggered, as this will be the root cause of the bug. The if statement has two conditions, logging them both and talking to Leon and the merchant, and the second one seems to be 0 for the merchant and non-zero for Leon, which leads to the crash. It's a lovely double pointer dereference. Starting at the first part, this plus ox5c, as we have its symbol, it's quite easy to find the constructors for the various types and then look at what they're initializing to what offsets. So this ox5c is a conversation object. From there we can dig a bit deeper and see that the ox3c offset is set to whatever value is 100 bytes in from this object, which this dynamic cast tells us is a conversation desk object. One more hop and we can see that this 100 offset is assigned to an object name class. If we look at the implementation details for object name, it looks like it just stores the hash of a string. Looking at how these conversations are created, there is a conversation manager class with a bunch of create from functions. The one that is actually called is create from binary. This uses Ogre's resource loading code, and I can see it's loading conversations.bin. Now we don't have a file called this, and there's not a lot of other files installed with the game. This shared.data file kind of stands out, as all the other files have descriptive names. So I've opened it up in a hex editor, and sure enough it has the string conversations.bin. It has a bunch of CV underscore identifiers, and there's also a strings map file, which makes sense for localization. We can search for the strings in the conversation we've been having with Leon. Confusingly, it looks like the character was once called Rico, as there's no Leon in the conversations or texture data. I suspect that there's a bug in this file data. Back to the code, and if we break on the function startConversationObject, the first argument is a conversation pointer, and looking at the ox3c offset, it's 0 for the merchant, but non-zero for our brother, formerly known as Leon. So we know at this point the bad data is already in the conversation object, so let's work our way backwards. Breakpoint on conversation init from object desk, and it's hit loads of times during the game startup, so presumably it's preloading all the conversations. We can also see from this it sets the description slot to conversation desk plus ox64. Interestingly, if we log the calls, then most of them are 0. Some more painful tracing, and we can see that the value is actually set from a serialize function, specifically serial loader IO object name. Okay, so what do we know? The game is checking if our current conversation has an object name, and if it does, then it pops one too many cameras. Most of the conversations seem to not have an object name. We know the hash from the object name is deserialized from the shared.data file, and we can see it here. I suspect this ID is just wrong, so let's zero it out.
Hey, I could help you too. For some pocket money, I can go out and tell people honourable things about you. What do you say?
Sounds good to me.
Great! I'll get spreading the word.
Well, there are some people who I would rather not.
Calm down. I know who to trust.
I guess we'll soon see.
There we go. All working. I sent my shared.data file over to the chap on Discord and he also confirmed it worked. This was fun, but there were some other issues, so as a quick bonus task, let's look at one more. He mentioned that there's an issue where an innkeeper falls through the floor which results in a soft lock. I grabbed his save file and headed on over.
Haven't seen you in here before. New in town?
Indeed I am.
You wouldn't happen to have come down from the mountains, would you?
Yes, indeed.
Ah, I like mountain folk. Got some relatives up there, you know. I've even got a special room, reserved exclusively for mountain folk. It's got biscuits on the table and everything. Come and see.
This feels a lot like a physics engine issue. The game is probably running faster on modern hardware than it was ever originally intended to. I messed around with the game state for a bit and managed to enable a debug physics layer, but I couldn't see anything obvious. In the settings file, but again not in the actual game, we can enable VSync, which will limit the frame rate to the refresh rate of the monitor, and that fixed it for me. Again, a bit of a back and forth over Discord, and he also had to use a frame limiter to get the same result, but he said it also fixed other physics type issues in the game. This second issue was more of a classic old games on new hardware fix than the first one, but it's still good to be able to get people unstuck. The studio that made this game still exists, so I emailed them my findings and my fix, but so far I've not heard anything back. This is a more unusual project as there's no actual code or patch for me to release, but the fixed data file is now linked on PC Gaming Wiki. However, if you want more low-level shenanigans and want to see me pull apart and explore an early version of the de novo DRM, then check out this next video.